You are watching CIOTV by Enterprise IT World, a production of Accent Infomedia.
In terms of 2022, wishing everybody a very happy new year to get started with, and to you too, Sanjay, and to the entire team there at Enterprise IT World. A very happy new year to all of you and a wonderful team that you have.
Hello and good afternoon. You are watching CIOTV.live. In the series of interviews with the senior leadership of IT, including CIOs, CTOs, and IT heads, we're trying to understand various perspectives of technology and practices. Today, we have our guest, Dr. Mukund, KS, AVP, and Head IT Eris Lifesciences Limited. Welcome, Dr. Mukund, and how are you?
Hey, hi, Sanjay. Good afternoon. I'm doing really well, and I hope you're doing good too. And things are as bright as the afternoon sun for you.
All right. Thank you very much for taking time out and speaking to CIOTV.live. So the first question coming on your way, we are seeing a lot of hue and cry around digital transformation recently. What is your perspective on the entire subject?
Very interesting, Sanjay, because it is like, if I would probably put it together, it is said that Colonel Sanders never shared his secret recipe for the Kentucky Fried Chicken. And magicians generally do not reveal the code. But I'm going to share with you that secret sauce, and I'm going to be revealing the magician's code. And shockingly, digital transformation is not about digital, but it is about transformation, and that word transformation is where that actual magic spell happens. There's a sense of myopia that is existing today around the terminology of digital transformation, but the focus is towards transformation, the word transformation, and essentially towards business transformation. See, I could be juggling upon a couple of terminologies that I may want to in terms of sentiment analysis, IRPA or intelligent RPA or augmented and virtual reality, IIoT, cloud, AI, and ML. But then what's going to happen is that it is not about that. But in a nutshell, it is about how these technologies are going to influence the business transformation, improve your efficiency, customer satisfaction, and how organizations can become more effective and make the jobs easier. So the customer patterns are evolving, and we need to map the customer journey and the stakeholder journeys. And it is about looking at your technology becoming an ally to the business and helping with the business transformation initiatives. So that's how I probably put the whole transformation way that it is getting evolved, and it's going to further evolve today.
Okay, I think you have 2 decades of experience, and you have witnessed the digital journey of several organizations from very close quarters, and probably you have been instrumental in creating IT roadmap and digital strategy for all those organizations. A quick questions come here. Where do you start? What is your recommendation? What is the beginning of the digital transformation? And is there any step-by-step approach to that?
A very important point that you're bringing in over here, Sanjay, because that is the very knotting questions that organizations are deliberating to solve. Well, yes, there is a step-by-step approach that organizations can embark on in accelerating their journey to cloud or to digital transformation. Like, one of the very primary models that I deploy is that of something called Gartner's PACE methodology. So when you look at the Gartner PACE methodology, it talks about 3 layers, which talks about your system of records, systems of differentiation, and your systems of innovation. Now let's envisage a structure of your house. And for the house to be built, you need a foundation to be strong in place. And once you have this foundation where you can build onto the pillars and finally onto the roof. So let's assume that you are into in your organization, your ERP is going to be your core. But if you're running on a very legacy or an archaic ERP system, probably you may want to move to a more standard ERP like an Oracle ERP, Microsoft Dynamics, or again SAP, like in terms of enabling your digital cores. Because once you have your digital core established, is then where you will be able to build on top of that. What happens over here is because you'll be having your own processes, which are going to be very unique to your organization, which also needs to be built on top of it. For example, it could be a lead scoring model or a dynamic scoring model in terms of how do you evaluate your customers, look at your competitors if you're deploying your CRM system. So that you can do better profiling, you can do better targeting, you can do better segmentation of your customers and perform related tactics. Now, once these pillars are getting erected, comes your roof or the systems of innovation, where you could talk about new ideas in terms of implementing of AR or VR, augmented and virtual reality. How do I look at integrating IoT or sensors on my manufacturing floor with my SCADA, my PLC devices to go back and give us in terms of prescriptive maintenance that could be performed, so that you will also be able to touch upon certain key metrics that your organization may look at, like OEE, in terms of operational equipment effectiveness. How do you look at it? Or if you're talking about a step-by-step approach for innovation, you could start off from like a very basic research, go through breakthrough innovation. How do you sustain your innovation? And then finally disruptive innovation. And again, when people talk about analytics, right, then it's again, Gartner is known for coining these very wonderful terminologies where they call upon, very true, the ascendary model that they so say for analytics, where you start with descriptive analytics, go to diagnostic analytics, predictive, and then prescriptive. But with a cloud coming into picture, if you still ask me, is a step-by-step approach essential? I would say that you could bypass and you could actually move over directly to prescriptive analytics. But how do you do that? In terms of you wanting to build a data lake today in your organization, if you look at the infrastructure, you need to look at all the various different parameters. It's going to take a long time. But let's assume that if you embark on a cloud journey, like say AWS, you could be starting on using with your Redshift. You could start looking at using AWS in terms of QuickSight, which is going to be like a BI tool for you. You could also start looking at how do I use AI and ML models like AWS Forecast. So you have your SAP. Let's assume you host your SAP S4HANA on AWS. You also have AI and ML models that are there on AWS, like AWS Forecast, that you could deploy on top of the data that you're having on AWS and try to create forecasting. Strategical and operational forecasting is what you could start doing. So this is what you could do so that you move in a very superluminal speed, and you don't have to follow a sequential approach sometimes. Though we say you could take a sequential approach, but at times you could also cut over there and move forward.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Mukund, for explaining the entire, journey bit by bit. Now, I think you are in a situation where you better understand from other people like me and other people about this new variant of the pandemic, which is around the corner. India is not immune from that. We have already experienced, we don't know what is going to happen in next quarter or two. How could organization be prepared for the eventualities from a hybrid work perspective? How to ensure or immune the organization from cyber security, not being hacked or attacked? So also collaboration becomes not impacted. Creating a very good atmosphere for the employees as well.
I think this is a very, this is actually the moment of time. It's a very testing time that we're all going through with the Omicron variant coming in. And this is respelling and a lot of impact on organizations and human lives. But then in terms of how do we probably look at how technology could be an ally over here and support organizations is where I probably would first talk about how could we enable people to start working remotely. It could be in terms of it could be as simple as a VPN connectivity. But then what happens is that with enabling a lot of people, your workforce, to work from home, the Pandora box reopens itself in a way, because they're going to be using unsecure internet connecting from home. That also, because at an organization, you do have your firewall in place, you're going to have all your relevant policies, security policies that are going to be there, all your systems out to ensure the endpoints are getting secure. But now you're going to look at tunneling towards internet that is not going to be secure. So in terms of how do we secure, that becomes the most important crux that we need to look at. So ensuring that you have a proper, a strong VPN mechanism in place, but not just a VPN, you could also look at deploying a lot of endpoint security solutions. That is essential. But if you ask me if just an endpoint security solution will suffice, I would say no, because it again becomes very important. How do I educate my field force, my employees, in terms of being safe? What I've also started doing in the organization is that, like, educating what kind of attacks can happen and how they could secure themselves. Also, a very interesting thing that I'm doing is also conducting mock phishing attacks. And I'm trying to see who would probably fall as a bait for these kind of attacks, and have a separate session being conducted for them, so that we ensure, because your first line and the last line of defense are going to be of your employees, irrespective of any IDS or an IPS system that you may want to put in place. Your employees will have to ensure that they are securing it. Also, very recently, the pharma and the healthcare and the life sciences industry has had a lot of impact during the COVID period, because if you look at a lot of our state actors and threat actors, they are trying to target the pharmaceutical organizations. Now, there are organizations like Strontium and who have been hitting across the most important or the larger pharma companies in terms of doing spear phishing, by even doing as simple as a man-in-the-middle attack on them. A Korean-based organization, Strontium, has also been responsible for doing some of these attacks. And we have seen a lot of Indian pharmaceutical organizations falling prey to it, where you need to ensure your OT security also becomes as important as your IT security and IT strategy, and ensuring that you're having a proper bridge between an IT OT security is going to be of crux. So this is something that I would put a lot of emphasis on, and where I will suggest organizations to also go back to platforms like Mitre, or they need to look at the various different frameworks that are available. Talk to these similar organizations in your own space, and look and reach out to either Mitre, and also to see whether you can embark on certain protocols that they are offering sector wise. So they also offer sector wise kind of suggestions of who's going to get impacted, and ensure that you are having a sectoral cyber security plan in place, which becomes very, very essential. So say if you're from financial sector, you have a separate plan along with for the financial group of organizations, or if you're from healthcare and life sciences, reach out and take their guidance in terms of what is to be done for healthcare and life sciences, and move forward on that. So that becomes very essential.
All right. So the step-by-step approach to digital transformation, which is basically to make the organization smart, seamless in inside to the employees, so outside to the customers. There are certain technologies that you mentioned also: AR, VR, artificial intelligence, and analytics, etc., etc. How these technologies, for example, artificial intelligence or analytics, AR, VR, impacting the pharma organization or pharma sector?
Very interesting the way that we are looking at healthcare IT today. So healthcare IT is probably taking a big jump. And this is the moment of time where we are actually moving into a lot of way that technology could enable the whole healthcare and life sciences industry. Earlier, we had a lot of access to the doctors. Like, if we come talk about a pharmaceutical organization, we had a lot of access to the doctors, where we could go, our medical reps could go meet them. But then with the whole pandemic in place, access to the doctors has got minimized. So how do we probably reach out to our doctors? How do we reach out to our patients? We are looking at omni-channel or a multi-channel approach. Could we probably reach out to them, in terms of, could I do a virtual detailing for them? Like, what we call as detailing is a doctor and a medical rep meet and talking about the product portfolios. Could we do that detailing virtually? So we are talking about virtual detailing. Also very important when we look at how technologies like augmented and virtual reality can impact the life of patients. Because there are very interesting case studies where if you look at burn victims, like the burn victims are not able to undergo treatment because of the scale at which the burn happens. But then getting them immersed. So when we talk about AR and VR, it is about an immersive experience that we are bringing on to people. What we also look at is the degrees of freedom, what we call as 6 degrees of freedom. So a person is completely immersified into a different world where we bring the virtual world and the real world together. Now, for these burn victims, using virtual reality, showcasing them or videos of snow-capped mountains in terms of glaciers, and a lot of these things has proven to also reduce the treatment, in terms of when the treatment is happening, the patients are able to better correspond and respond to the treatment, because by 20%, it helps to cut down on the impact that they're going through. Probably what could also be done is in terms of training your people on the shop floor. You could use augmented reality. That is again a project that we are also looking at, to be training my people on the field, on the shop floor, rather than coming and putting their hands directly on the machines, which means that I also look at a very important KPI here, organizational safety. So we could look at augmented reality and virtual reality from these perspectives, but also in terms of how artificial intelligence, machine learning could be probably used. Again, when we look at, say, for instance, the cloud platform like AWS, you're having tools from AWS called TextRack. So I could probably look at TextRack to extract data. So we are not talking about OCR. What we are talking about an AI combined with OCR to extract data from healthcare records. It could be prescriptions, it could be in terms of other healthcare EMR records, and try to identify patterns that probably we may not have seen earlier that could further result in better enhancing the overall efficacy of certain treatments that could be provided out to patients.
All right, you said cloud, isn't it? But these days we are hearing a lot about cloud also. And it's not a brainer thing that cloud does have an advantage. It has few advantages, of course. But with this real, a new Pandora box getting opened, what is your recommendation of solving those challenges?
Very interesting. So typically when we look at from a cloud perspective or a cloud journey, so what I generally tell is that it is like an Abhimanyu's entry into the war zone. People
Correct.
know how to get into the cloud, which is the easier thing said and to be done. But it is very difficult when they don't know how they could probably move out of the cloud. Now, this is becoming one of those challenges. There are a lot of advantages, so we are not going to get into that. But what should people watch out? Or what should CIOs and IT leaders or any organization that is venturing themselves into the cloud? The first thing is defining the exit strategy. So it becomes very essential that when you move on or move forward, how do I ensure that I'm not getting locked down to a particular cloud service provider? How do I ensure that I can be as hybrid as possible? A suggestion probably, if I could probably put across, is, say, for instance, you have your VM instances where you can build VMware as God is VM on cloud. Now, using this methodology, you could move to AWS. If you're not happy with AWS, you can move to Azure tomorrow. So you're not going to be residing on one particular cloud platform, but then you could always move across because it is only a virtual instance that you're looking at doing a migration. Also very imperative that when you're striking the deal or moving forward, that you have reviewed the terms and conditions of the cloud, and also ensure that you are also able to build in over there when you want your data back, in what form, in what format, in what frequency is that data going to be shared back to you. Like, it's always said that your data is your property, you could take your data, we don't hold your data. But in reality, when you try to move those instances or you try to move your data, that is where you're going to have a lot of challenges. It could also be in terms of where you're going to have challenges in terms of egress, or data moving into the cloud doesn't have a challenge, but when you move data out of the cloud is going to become a challenge. Well, I would always say that the cloud is more secure than your own data center, probably, depending on a lot of other factors. But then the security that the cloud offers has always only been till the hypervisor level. So whatever needs to be built above the hypervisor falls under your purview, irrespective of it being in your own data center, on whether it is going to move onto the cloud. In terms of how do you secure the cloud, in terms of what security rules are being deployed, becomes very important in terms of ensuring. So this is again something which is going to be very, very important. And the next very important thing is in terms of ensuring that you have a very hybrid format and not putting all eggs into one basket, which means that it's going to become a challenge for you tomorrow. So I would say a very a defragmented approach is very essential today to take when you move on to the cloud. And that is where it is going to be really very helpful. Else you will be pulled into the quicksand of being into the cloud, not able to move out, not able to migrate. And these are these challenges that typically most of the organizations do feel at any given point of time.
All right, you just mentioned about hybrid, and you also said that you want to not put all the eggs into a single basket. Do you mean is it on-prem plus cloud, or it is multiple cloud that one should have the provisions?
I would say a combination of on-prem and multiple clouds is how I would probably put it. Because there are a lot of advantages that you get with various different cloud CSPs today, right? And then one solution may be available with one, or one service may be available with one. And you may want to take on to the advantages that they have. So it becomes very essential that you are able to go across in a very hybrid fashion, and not just with one cloud. Because if you look at GCP for that instance, there are a lot of benefits that GCP today, or like when I say benefits in terms of the features or in terms of the functionalities that they are having, which probably a couple of other CSPs may not have. Or similar with Azure, with the Azure data framework and the pipelines that you could probably be creating, which is again going to be very varied when you move in. So it's always like, what suits best at that moment for your particular strategy, and go ahead with that.
What is your prediction about 5G once it comes? When is there any timeline? You must be hearing from different sources. What is going to be the impact on the entire ecosystem, entire outcome of the productivity?
5G, as you rightly mentioned, there's going to be a lot of impact. Like, when we look at the moment of impact, I could probably relate it to a quantum of impact that would start happening with 5G actually getting rolled out. Like, though there's been a lot of conversations in various different forums in terms of 5G is getting launched, but then there's still time for 5G to be commercially available as a solution. It's still going to take time. But then the advantages that you will start seeing when 5G does get commercialized is that, especially when we talk about IIoT, or when you're talking about machines talking to machines, or you're going to move into more models of prescriptive maintenance of your systems, that is when you could probably look at 5G really kicking off. 5G would also kick off in terms of cybersecurity, where you will need updates from various different engines that you may be pulling in various different data points from, like, your security updates. That is again an area where, with 5G coming into picture, it's going to be a two-edged sword. With 5G coming in terms of impacting security, at the same point of time enabling security also. That is again going to help over there. It is also going to help organizations which have a need for dire connectivity in places where you're going to have network connection, in terms of ISPs available. You could also look at how do I probably look at putting in multiple different 5G devices together to bring across a single, so like, where I could start using that consolidated bandwidth. So there's a lot of advantages that 5G will bring in also in terms of healthcare, where we could look at healthcare even going to tier 2 or tier 3 places, villages to the most needed. Because then we could also look at how do we look at reaching to the end patients who do not have access to good healthcare systems or to good doctors. That could also get enabled with 5G around the corner. Now, it's not that it is not there in today, but then 5G is still going to open up further avenues for people to start realizing on. But then it's going to take a little more time, at least a year or so, a year and a half for commercialization to happen, and before it hits onto the floor.
Now let us come to the business part. Now, CIOs these days not anymore the technology enablers. They're also business enablers. They're sitting in the marketing meeting, sales meeting, right? They're giving their valuable inputs into how to expand their business. So there are they're creating various channels also of business opportunity. One of those is, of course, directly one which I can see is the social media campaign, social media and being web present vibrantly, taking the messaging of the company, taking the the plus of the company into a wider audience. That might be one. There might be multiple examples. So, what is your thoughts around it?
Very interesting. So again, what I would probably do is I will answer two of your questions over here in two parts, because first, in terms of if I look at from a social media strategy, or if I look at a social media quotient, as how I so call, I just mentioned in terms of crawl, walk, fly, run kind of approach, and the same could also be deployed for your social media with strategy and quotient. Because today, what's happening? The business platforms are changing. The business channels are also changing, and today IT is not just a cost center, but it is becoming a profit center in terms of even how the CIO is taking up the role of a chief information business officer, or also working with the chief marketing officer, the chief strategy officer. In the month 1 or 2, I will start with a crawl kind of approach, where you could talk about things like content optimization, organized content hubs. And then from month 3 onwards, when you start move towards more snackable content, more engagement, track and monitor the real-time conversations that are happening. That is where people need to move towards. And then finally, when you start moving in terms of how do you start running with your social media strategy, is in terms of creating blogs, in terms of creating presentation, infographics, your channels, whether it's going to be Instagram or it's going to be any other specialized platforms based on the industry that you are in. Also creating community outreach in terms of identifying promotional avenues becomes very important. And your final, in month 5 and onwards, where you start flying in terms of your social media strategy, where you start going mobile, where you become more app-based, you have microsites, dedicated websites, create responsiveness. That is how probably that you should be moving further in terms of when you say that, or when your organization will say that, no, now I need to start looking at my end customer and how do I get in touch with them from a social front.
The other one is that technology is one pillar, the other one is business strategy. Many times they do not meet. Technology goes in on its own way, and the decision making on the technology adoption happens in a different aisle. Business happens in a different aisle. Many times it doesn't match. Alignment doesn't happen. So the simple reason is that business goes through, the outcome of business goes through a lot of hurdles. Always there is a wanting a budget or time, HR also. So from a technology point of view, how do the CIOs try to bridge the gap? Are they bridging the gap?
Well, let me probably mention, let's look at a triangle. And if I talk about a triangle, I'm going to attribute these 3 sides to cost, time, and quality. at any given point of time, it is possible only to solve or achieve only two of these dimensions. And well, that's the hard reality. And as a CIO, it does become a challenge to balance these three dimensions. I'm not saying that it's not possible to balance, but then it becomes a challenge in balancing these three dimensions. So any of the projects that I embark on, I ensure that I work with business teams to very clearly define the project KPIs and metrics with ROI and quantified benefits. Thus, I ensure that when I move the IT function from a cost center to a profit center, say, for example, if I was to talk about from a digital marketing space, like if I'm going to take up projects with my marketing team or with a CMO, I'm going to talk about like when they reach out to me and say that, hey, we want to do so and so, I would look at certain KPIs and metrics to get even started before I start solutioning for them. It could be in terms of KPIs like your web traffic sources. What is my brand awareness sentiment score that I will impact? Or is it in terms of website traffic leads that the impact will happen? Or is it in terms of returning visitors or online conversion rates or the lead conversion rate? Or what is the lifetime value of a customer? If it is a manufacturing related project in terms of where I need to work with the manufacturing team, it'll be in terms of certain KPIs that I'll define in terms of mean time between failure, mean time to repair, or the overall equipment, or in terms of quality, you could move in terms of KPIs like cost of poor execution and cost of poor quality, or with the finance team, it could be in terms of top line revenue growth or the bottom line that you're going to impact. Now, the projects that are going to have a higher ROI and quantified benefits will get the prime time of my IT team, since we, like any other organization, would have limited resources, right? That's the way that I probably see that the three dimensions needs to be balanced to ensure that there is a healthy equilibrium that is getting maintained between the whole CFO, the CIO, and the leadership team.
Very nicely, elaborately, with clarity, you are giving all these answers. Okay, all right. I think with this, we end this conversation here. Thank you, Dr. Mukund, for taking time out and speaking to CIOTV.live and with a lot of emphasis on each of the technologies or practices that you have experienced, you shared. Thank you very much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Dr. Mukund, AVP and Head IT, Eris Lifesciences Limited. If you have any question and query, please drop in your mail in the ID given here at the end of this video. Thank you, Dr. Mukund.
Thank you, Sanjay.